Okay. Could you allow me to host? And I can share my screen?
I think I set it up there. Try it
Oh,
and
nice.
see.
Okay, yeah, it'll let me do that. Okay. You're well ahead of me, Sue. Thank you.
No, it's just called dumb luck. I never shut it off the last time.
Right. Well done. Okay. I'm let's see here. I'm gonna share my slide screen. Well, I like looking at you all. So I'm gonna set this up so that you're looking at my screen. I'm gonna present my screen, but I'm also gonna keep the chat open, and I'm gonna keep the gallery mostly open too, so I could see quite a few of you. So I think I chose the right county government building. there was yeah, always getting complicated, but yeah, it's welcome to a political messaging training that I've been giving for quite a while now, and I really love it, and I practically beg indivisible group leaders to invite me to do it, because I'm just a big fan of it. I think I'm a bit like, I've been converted, right? And I've got that sort of enthusiasm right now, and a little bit of my background, to get to the conversion story. Growing up in Western Pennsylvania in the 70s and 80s, my mom was a high school teacher. She was a substitute teacher for a while, and then she was a middle school teacher, and they went on strike kind of a lot. I mean, at least it seemed that way. And there was a lot of complaints about the teachers always going on strike. And I totally get it now with 3 kids at home with COVID. I want my kids in school because it's doing my head in, right? So I could see people's frustration. But, there was a lot of bile. There was a lot of teachers they get summers off anyway. There was a lot of kind of resentment built into it. And it just kind of hurt, listening to my friends' parents, say, teachers have it too easy and always go on strike. And I'm like, I'm in the room, like my mom's, and as I got older, I remember talking to my mom, like, we got to do something about this. Like, we live in a small town. Why we have a great newspaper. Why don't you just write letters to the editor, Mom, and just, like, set the record straight? And she never did. And I never did. And this isn't directly the reason why my county is now plus 17 Trump County. But just like as I was growing up, we were going from Union Democratic stronghold to a plus 17 Trump County. And every baseball team, Little League baseball team I played for, and Little League soccer team, I played for 4: Brockway Glass, Washington Steel, Jessup Steel, and Coca-Cola. So we had a bottling plant. And 3 of those were consolidated or closed by the time I graduated high school, right? This was like the de-skilling of the Rust Belt. And my town's population was dropping from 27,000 to 16,000. And that's why you have so many Steelers bumper stickers in Arizona and Florida and places like that, because people were just leaving. And it's always kind of stuck in my craw that we watched this happen without pushing back enough, we let the narrative go into kind of an anti-union, anti-teacher, anti-education sort of narrative. And I want to win that back. And so messaging and letter to the editor writings become really, like, a bit of a cause celeb for me. Now, in the meantime, though, I went into education, and I went and got a PhD, and I taught Latin American history, and I taught cultural history for about 15, 20 years. And that's how I kind of wound up in Minnesota. In fact, I taught at a research institution in Florida, and then I was offered a position at Gustavus, and I wanted to teach at a small liberal arts college. So I jumped at the chance, which meant I was part of the world of kind of facts and argument and footnotes and all that good stuff, right? And the conversion came when like with a lot of us, we started rethinking our own country and our own role in civic engagement when Trump was elected. And I was super grateful to be in Minnesota when that happened and not Florida, as you can imagine.
Mhm.
I'm forever grateful to Mark Dayton, for being the backstop in 2017 to keep us, from becoming like Wisconsin, right? Um, but I also started getting more involved in work with NGOs, and in particular, MN 350 and climate justice work. And I started paying a lot of attention to comms, and I started thinking a lot about communication and messaging, and that's where I started to pay a lot of attention to a couple different sort of bodies of work, which I'm going to try and like sum up here tonight. One of which is George Lakoff's work on framing, for example. And what's really exciting is you all have a second kind of event with George Green, who's really, really, the Minnesota guru on framing. So, look forward to that. And I'll just give you like a bit of kind of my take on it. And then we'll move on to something that I don't think he does yet, which is the race class narrative. And I really want to give you a good chunk of work from the race class narrative too. And when you look at both of those, the thing that stands out for me is drop the facts, stop arguing. What you fight, you feed. And my conversion story from like academia, where it's all got to be like precise, and whoever's got the best facts is going to win. That's how these arguments work in a civilized, enlightened society. But in fact, political behavior doesn't respond as well as progressives would like to think. And so my moment of kind of like, well, it happened within the context of Indivisible, actually, where as I was kind of looking at a lot of like messaging work with MN 350 and climate justice, I also helped found a couple Indivisible groups in 2017. And I started paying a lot more attention to like what Indivisible National was doing, right? But I'd still like the Minnesota work. I like the local work. The Indivisible group I founded was actually state legislative work in Minnesota, hence my sort of gratitude towards Mark Dayton, because that's really where my pain points were in 2017 and 2018. But I remember like paying attention to my first national call for Indivisible. Like I think it was 2019 already. Like I was not really paying attention. And Ezra Levin, he said, he's one of the co-founders of Indivisible. He said, progressives don't need more education or information. They need more power. And I thought, okay, whoa, this is a moment, right? Make argue this out a little bit for me, Ezra. I'm saying that in my head. And he said, we have all the information we need to solve the climate crisis. We have all the education we need to expand healthcare. We have all the info. It's there. Trust me, congressional staffers have this information. They have access to the experts. If they wanted to build out a different society, they could do it. They don't need more information, folks. They need more power. And so that was a shift for me where I started to think, okay, I know facts are important if you're building bridges, but we need to win some elections. And maybe to do that, my role can be less about this kind of long burn educational sort of process of, creating more enlightened sort of Renaissance women and men out in the real world. And maybe I can pay more attention to messaging and help build out a progressive echo chamber that is effective for convincing people to vote for better candidates that are going to solve our problems rather than continue to divide us around resentment and with dog whistle politics and things like that. Okay, so that's me, and that's a little bit of where I come from. And this is the agenda. Now, the stress tonight, I think, was on, well, I'm not sure how you read it, but I've led with letters to the editor. And so we'll do that first. We'll do a little bit more crowdsourcing of that than actual me just sort of saying, this is what you need to know. Because I think the more important and interesting stuff to get through tonight is the political messaging. And then if we have some time, we'll move into talking points and practice. Because I think I'm going to give you a lot of information, and I think for some of you, particularly if you're coming to this for the first time, I'm going to ask you to actually rethink how you approach your messaging work, which means everything, which means every Facebook post you make, every comment you want to make to your uncle, every conversation you have with your neighbor, for example, as well as letters to the editor, and more kind of thought through kind of like presentations of ideas. And that rethinking takes some practice. And so that's why, Sue, when I saw you here, I thought this is exactly how this is supposed to happen. You don't take this as the last moment for anything. Definitely come to George's presentation in a month, and maybe even check out George Lakoff's book. There's another great book too I want to recommend right now. Just came in the mail yesterday. Where is it? It's by Heather McGee. Hoping you could see this. It's called The Sum of Us. Heather McGee, The Sum of Us. And it's a great book. The subtitle is What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together, by Heather McGee. And McGee is like the clarified butter. McGhee. All right. Any thoughts or questions at this moment? Anybody want to break up the sound of my voice? You can pop something in the chat. Maybe what you're looking forward to tonight, if you wanted to share that, or any sort of questions, or anybody else from Pittsburgh. Thank you, Arthur. Very fast on the Amazon. Although I would recommend your independent booksellers. But very cool, very cool. My kids are like, Dad, you got to get the Amazon Prime account back, and I'm like, no, Jeff Bezos not getting any more money from me. Holding firm on that. My kids, they're just, they don't get it. They hate it. All right. Where are we heading next with this? Okay, letter to the editor, writing technicalities. I really mean it when I say I want to crowdsource this. I learned a while back that as an educator or anybody in the classroom, if the information you're passing on is information that people can get on the Google machine, then you're really not earning your money. And I will say there's plenty of like advice out there for writing letters to the editor. However, it's useful to workshop this. So let's do that. I've put down some things that I think are pretty useful. And while I'm going through those, I'd love it if you would put down some of your top bits of advice, either to share as like a question, what does Scott think about this? Or I'd like everybody to know that I know a little bit about this because I've been writing letters to the editor for a long time. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And I think one main point per letter, I think that's a hard one for a lot of us because we have a lot to say, but always check and see if you're making 2 or 3 points. And if you are, that's great because you've got 2 or 3 letters and you're way more productive than you realize. So one main point per letter, keep it short, keep it to that point. Check your spelling and your grammar. And part of this is that we're now sending things in digitally, right? And a lot of editors sometimes will just take it, copy it, and paste it. So if you're that means they might not be checking your spelling and your grammar. So get a partner, get a friend, get maybe even a team together and check each other's spelling and grammar and argue about the Oxford comma and things like that. Okay. The next one is kind of worth sort of, I feel it's a bit provocative and I'm not 100%, on this, but it's come up in a lot of trainings and things that I've done, which is, thinking about the words that you're using and thinking about the impact of your words. You want things to land with people. You want things to be memorable. You want things to stick in people's heads. But the tendency, I think, sometimes is to, want to be smart, and that's fine too. I don't think that's bad, but I think there's something a little bit better about using ordinary words. So I'll recommend it, but I don't think I have the gospel on that one. I do think we want to have a great first sentence. Sorry, my tip my hat there, tip my hand there. I want you to have a great first sentence, so some sort of hook. This can be well, we'll get into like what I think at least what the race class narrative thinks is a really good first sentence, and that's something that leads with a universal value. But you definitely want to have a good first sentence. A bit of a pro tip is, depending on the newspaper you're going for, give it a title of your own, meaning like or at least you're suggesting one. So sometimes editors, when they get things, they will want to categorize it or compartmentalize it for like the visual of their page, and they might miss your point. So it's better to control that aspect of it by creating your own title. And then one that's really useful, like over the whole process, particularly if you're like thinking about doing this on a regular basis, or even better, you're thinking about doing this as a indivisible group, and that's to engage that editor and build a relationship with her or him. And there's a couple stories that sort of drive this home. One good one is another indivisible group has been doing a letter to the editor campaign for a while, and after a while they got to know the editor pretty well, and they asked the editor, I think they put it like this, like, we'd like our letters to go in on a Monday because we think that's when most people read letters to the editor. And the editor was like, oh no, that's not true at all, it's actually Friday. They were like, oh, okay. And then they were like, well, would you mind if we sent our letters in like over the week, if you could like save them and put them in on a Friday? And he said, yeah, sure. Okay. So really great. Before that, they were like trying to land it, and they were stressing out trying to get it all on the Monday, and all they had to do is ask the editor for a bit of help and support. Now, it took them a little bit of time to show that, you know, they were that they were good letter writers and that they were respectful and so forth. So building a relationship with the editor can really help. And then something that's excellent as an idea is, you know, you've got a good letter. Why not shop it around to different newspapers? You could try the Strib, you could try a local newspaper, you can even try newspapers that, you know, are quite further afield than you geographically. I think there's one caveat here though, and that's if you do get published, it's a nice idea to follow up with the other editors and say, oh, by the way, that letter's just made it in, you know, the other day to the Star Tribune. I'd still love it if you'd publish it too, but I just want you to know. And then they can decide whether they want to do that letter again. Okay. What about you all? Have you got anything that you know about letters to the editor?
Well, maybe I'll jump in. Why not?
Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sound great.
It's just that our climate group here in Delano, and some of you may be involved in that, have a way. They're doing a climate corner in our local newspaper, and I really like the idea that they have a team that works together as they write. One person is in charge of writing it, and then they pass the piece to 2 or 3 others, I believe it is. And to me, that's what I would need. And that support of someone to look at and say, you know, maybe you would like to say it like this, or maybe we ought to say it like this, and have it be that more than just one person. Maybe that's just kind of something that everyone already thinks is an important idea. It might slow down the process a bit, but it allows for, I think, a better way of getting feedback and maybe missing the mark a little bit, avoiding missing the mark.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and I'm going to reinforce that on the next slide, in fact. So thank you. I don't want to transition just yet. I want to leave this sort of hanging here for a few seconds and see if anybody else has anything that they want to venture as far as like a technicality of letter writing, something that you think is important.
I like your first two bullets. They're kind of related, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I noticed in the Wright County Journal is, you know, they'll start a letter and the columns are really narrow, and then it jumps over and like 5 pages later in some random place it picks up again. And I find that really hard to make that jump. So I would say in that case, you know, with that format and everything, the shorter the better. You know, when I read other people's stuff, half the time I never make that jump. You know, if it's that long, nobody's going to read the second part of it. This is the way I feel. I might
I
be
think
wrong,
that's fair.
but
I think that's fair.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I like it short and sweet.
And
That's
that brings up, you know, that reinforces the point of really know your not just your audience, but get to know the format of your paper. Is it weekly? Is it daily? How do they break it up? How quickly can you get yours in? You know, because you want these things to like resonate with something that's actually happening at the time. Okay. We're not going to leave letters to the editor just yet. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is about strategy. And Gwen, this is something I felt that you were talking about. But by all means, if there are other technical things that come up, let's get them in the chat. And I do see two, actually. What about a letter to a politician with a copy to the paper? I think that's great. I think that's fabulous. I think it's when we go after politicians or we support politicians, there's a couple things going on there. Which one wants to watch, and one of those is that the closer you are to an election, the more likely it is that they're going to the paper's going to charge you because it moves into like a political ad sort of space. So that's a bit tricky, but you can get around that by saying things like the occupant of the White House or you know what a good president should be doing is X and Y without naming actual names. So that's one of the ways around it. But we have another 18 months before we have to start thinking about that. In the meantime, there's the indivisible DNA, particularly in red districts, is to really go after the Republican, and 99 times out of 100. And what's going on there is that the politician, almost all politicians spend a lot of time on their brand, on their image, and that's why they only say certain things. That's why they only show up in certain places. They try to protect themselves from being in a situation where they're not quite in control, right? We saw this with town halls when we started to show up at town halls and ask tough questions. They changed the rules of the town halls where they would only allow, a certain number of questions, and those questions would be drawn out of a hat. And, you're not even sure if that's actually what's on that piece of paper. And what Indivisible suggests, for example, is to really go for the politician in your letter, for example, in ways that disrupt their brand, that really affect their image in the public eye. And so that's a tip about like going after the politician. It's not so much about arguing with them or proving them wrong, or those could be tactics, but that's not the whole point. The strategy is you're trying to undermine them and the image that they're trying to project. And a nice way of thinking about this is if you could show them to not be representative of their district, that always hurts them as well, right? Okay, they're too extreme. This view is well outside the mainstream of what ordinary folks in Wright County want for their children, things like that. Okay. Other question from Lee is, how many co-authors on a letter is appropriate? I think this gets us into like, do we put our group name down? do we say, president of, X? There's different strategies here. I think much of the time, if you're trying to message in deeper ways, you want to be more grassroots, and you want this to be about, and we'll talk a little bit about, your subjectivity here. You want this to be about ordinary people and how they feel about these sorts of things.
Mhm.
There is a tendency to, I'm from this organization has endorsed something, we know what we're talking about. I think there's a big role to play in that too. Particularly if you have a number of groups and you can kind of show, they're called like sign-on letters. Like you can, if you're taking out an ad in the Star Tribune against line 3, you want to have, lots of popular, big, heavy hitters. There's more of a kind of a less about the facts and more about, like, the last one had the Indigo Girls, and so you're going for the old Garth Brooks, and you're going for big names there. On a smaller issue, it could I think it's almost always better to not say Wright County indivisible, partly because that becomes very partisan, and we want to keep this looking, like it's ordinary people embracing their values moving forward. And so I think that question of how many co-authors on a letter is appropriate, that's where my mind goes. I don't know, Lee, how else to answer, like why you would choose to have 1 versus 3 versus 5. I would think if you're trying to normalize something over time, you would want to have just one author on that letter, and then have another letter follow up from another author, and then have another letter follow up from another author, to create the reality that there's a number of people that think and feel this way and can be convincing on it. Okay, so what I've written down here on the slide, called LTE strategy. First, I think letters are really powerful and stories are really powerful when they come from individuals who are willing to wear their subjectivity, on their sleeve. So who are you? Who are you in the community? What's your role? What's your experience? How do people know you? And we all play different, we all wear different hats. So you kind of have a choice here. So you can be strategic. Am I a grandmother, or am I, I was a vet, but now I'm a grandmother. Which of those do you want to embrace in your letter? Or do you want it to be both? I mean, is this, but again, I like the idea that this isn't your only letter. So, keep some of your powder dry, perhaps. Those personal stories, you're more likely to get read. It's more likely to kind of continue, if you're, I was a soccer coach or a Girl Scout leader or something like that, but you also have a real reason why you're writing about this particular issue. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to have an experience and a set of values. And then the other strategy there about building a team, that gets, to what Gwen was saying. And I'm a big fan of this. I think there's quite a number of advantages, some of which, Gwen spelled out there really nicely. It allows you to bounce ideas off of one another. It allows you to catch certain things. It allows you to try out different sort of messaging strategies. If you have a team, you can create a regular stream of letters, and that really helps to normalize an issue. As I mentioned that earlier. And one of the things I like about a team is that you're all reasonably politically engaged, and you probably have different inputs in your lives on the issue, and you're reading slightly different things, and you're following, different news sources and different politicians and things like that. And if you're doing all that and you come together on a bi-weekly basis around an issue, your meetings might be a little longer if you're kind of sharing the things that have happened, but you can also crowdsource in ways that allow you to create messages that engage with what's already out there and create kind of a discourse. And so I'll give you an example of that. Like during election season, if you've got a candidate who's putting out some really great messaging on climate action or rural broadband or healthcare, and you're also listening to what's happening, you know, in the workplace or with your family or what have you, and their concerns around these issues. And you can create a letter to the editor that purposefully echoes the language of that political candidate that you're trying to support. And the best case scenario here is that somebody reads the newspaper in the morning, reads your letter to the editor, and then the mail comes an hour and a half later, and there's a political flyer in there from the candidate, and just enough time has passed that they don't quite remember your letter to the editor, but the ideas have gone in there, and then they get reinforced when the flyer comes through their door. So there you can see how that would be, you know, really nice, kind of, because we all need more than just one touch if we're going to start to change our mind about things. So that's what I mean about building into a larger messaging discourse on the issues. Okay. So any thoughts or questions about LTE strategy? If you do, pop them in the chat. I'll go on to the next slide here, which is really just a couple hot links. And oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to let me make sure I got the permissions on this. Gotta get this out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to put this slide deck in the chat. And I think when you're there, you could go to slide number 5 and you can click on these two letter to the editor writing guides. But I'll say this, Indivisible aren't the only people that have put together letter to the editor guides. And in fact, if you're on a particular issue, it's worth Googling national organizations and letter to the editor and national organizations that touch on the issue that you care about. So I just know, because I've done a little bit of this in the past, the ACLU, for example, has a whole letter to the editor sort of guide built into their website. And a lot of other organizations will too. So I gave you the Indivisible ones there. I think that they make some really good points about how to go after politicians, but you can also get a lot of this information about basic letter to the editor techniques from national organizations as well. Okay, now I want to move us on to the actual messaging. Okay, and so for the next kind of 25 minutes, these are the things that I'm gonna go over. Number one, your audience is not the Trump supporters. As much as you want to argue with them, drop it. It's actually the persuadables. And I've got some really cool stuff to show you about who the persuadables are and what they respond positively to. And that information, when I get to it, comes from the race class narrative, and it comes from a couple folks like Anat Shankar Osorio, who runs ASO Communications, which is right here under the first bullet point. Another thing I'm going to really drive home is to minimize those facts. And I'm going to drive home not to argue against things, if you start down that road, pivot fast and argue for things, particularly creating a better world. I want you to use personal stories and universal values instead of facts. We'll go a little bit into like being careful to avoid conservative frames, but that's the thing that George Green will handle a lot more in a month, and encourage you to use instead progressive frames. I want you to not leave race or any sort of difference open to interpretation. Okay, I'm going to pause on that for a second. Not leaving race or any sort of difference open to interpretation. Now, I'll tell you why. Because we're all swimming in a deeply racist society. And if we leave difference, particularly racial difference, open to interpretation, then it's going to get interpreted the opposite way that we want it to. So I'll give you an example. If we were to have a conversation here and one of us was to say, isn't it awful that, or just to be posting something that, COVID infection rates and death rates were much worse in communities of color, and end on that. I would understand that as an indictment of the inequities in our healthcare system. I would understand that as a function of structural racism. And I think a lot of you would as well. However, if we don't point that out, if we don't say the reason it affected communities of color worse is because of inequities in our healthcare system or because of structural racism, and then maybe put that in some ordinary language. If we just stop, we're leaving it open to interpretation that why. So why did it affect communities of color more egregiously? And if we leave it open to interpretation, there's way too much racism out there. And it's going to make it very easy for folks to say in their heads, well, okay, sure, but that's because they must have deserved it. That's because they must have done things. That's because they don't, whatever the racist kind of fallback is, they don't have good enough jobs, or they don't take good enough care of each other or themselves, or they eat bad food, or what have you. So don't leave race when you're talking about inequities or differences. Don't leave those differences open to interpretation. Spell them out a little bit more. Okay. Last 2 points. Calling out politicians is okay. We kind of went over that a little bit earlier. In fact, that's what Indivisibles really pushes, is calling out those politicians. I think you want to be careful here not to seem too partisan right away, because then people just sort of turn off and they dismiss your views. And it doesn't matter at that point for sure how many facts you've got on your side, because we now have this whole concept of like alternative facts, and people are just going to be like, no, you're wrong because of CNN. So when you're thinking about going after politicians, you want to do it in a way that doesn't just trigger folks right away. And we'll look a little bit at how that can happen. And then, I think a really exciting tip about this is to use state identity a lot. Minnesota this, Minnesota that. And I didn't misspell Minnesota there. I know how to spell Minnesota, but I was doing this for a group in Missouri. So where they love Missouriness, just like we love Minnesotanness. So that's kind of like so that's the framework for some of the things I'm going to explore now with you. All right, persuadables. These are the folks we're after. These are the folks we're trying to get on board. This is why we write our letters to the editor. This is why we make comments. This is why we post things. Not because we want to argue with the Trumpers, because there's a group of voters out there who are going to be responsive to our message. And I'm gonna prove that in a second. gonna get rid of this chat, and I'm also gonna move us to a PowerPoint. I want us to look at a PowerPoint in a second, but I want to say a little bit more about the persuadables. But let me ask you all, who do you think I mean when I say the persuadables? Somebody want to come off mute and take a stab at it? Who are these persuadables that I'm saying are nearly 50% of the population?
They're ones that probably don't have strong feelings one way or the other and can be talked to, that can be open, that want to have you show them things and why should we think the way you think.
Okay, I like that. What are some other qualities of these not mythical persuadables?
I think it might be my neighbor who I always thought was a staunch Republican. And when we really started talking about that before the election, she was willing to hear everything I had to say. And I was real careful to say, I don't want to influence your vote.
Mhm.
But it was like, had no clue. And they're my neighbors that I thought were
Mhm.
of a very different ilk. So it was good to have that experience and realize that we know each other and we have a relationship. And even though I put them in a category, that I was wrong.
Okay, I like this too. John wrote independence. And I'm going to add a couple things to this, and then we'll dig in a little bit on how to reach the independence. Independence, let's see. Persuadables are low information voters. They're people that aren't like totally in Trump's camp or totally in like a more progressive camp, right? Like let's think of ourselves as like the progressive base. And there's a Trump base out there too, right? And we're camps that like we think a lot about things. We're really sure our values align with the political views that we had. We talk to other people about politics that helps drive home our identity as being quite far to the left or on the left or staunchly liberal. And Trumpers have their kind of echo chamber and their values, and we're just not going to see eye to eye. It's just not. We're not going to change them, and they're not going to change us. And ASO Communications and Demos and as they say on podcasts, some very smart people got together and started trying to divide up like the Midwestern electorate. And they did go for the Midwest. And so Annette Shankar Osorio, for example, she's from Wisconsin. She now teaches at Berkeley in the communications department. Demos is a think tank in DC, you probably know. There's Heather McGee. I showed you her book. She's been working for Demos. They studied the electorate in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Ohio. And they asked a lot of questions of us. And they divided us into three camps. They kind of realized that like there's three types out there for the purposes of like messaging. And one is us. We're the base, the progressive base. The other is the Trumpers. And in a place like Minnesota, we're roughly the same amount. Like if you took the whole state. There's 25 to 26% of us, and there's 25 and 26% Trumpers. Just never going to agree on anything. And then there's the persuadables in the middle, and that's 50% of the Minnesota electorate. And what makes them persuadable is part of what you all said, but the main things that make them persuadable are that they will respond positively to both a Trumper message and a progressive message. It's whatever they hear the most, the boldest, and the last is what they're going to believe or how they're going to vote, right? Because they're not spending a lot of time on this. I know. It's like, oh my God, democracy, right? But 50% of our state. Okay, and we're a very educated state. Okay, so one last thing to say about persuadables, they're not moderates. They're not sitting there working it all out like, well, you say it should be a $17 minimum wage. My conservative buddy's saying it's before. Well, so I'm about 11 because I'm a moderate and I don't want to go too far to the left or the right. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people that don't even think that much about it. They're like, well, he said 4 really loudly. And he's been saying 4 in my ear because we worked together for 5 years. So I'm kind of like low on the minimum wage thing. That's a persuadable, right? All right. Now, these persuadables, I'm going to prove to you that they respond to both the Trump message and the progressive message through the research of the race class narrative. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what I'm going to show you is something called dial testing. And dial testing is when you get some people with some headphones and you play a message for them and you give them a dial. And when they like the message, they turn the dial up. And when they don't like aspects of the message, they turn it down. And so they're responding in real time to what they're hearing. And you do that to enough people and you create a composite for the opposition, the Trumpers, the orange square there, right? You create a composite of what they like and what they don't like. But at the same time, you also test the base and the persuadables, our base, right? This is race class narrative language here. Our base is the progressive base. It's blue there. The Trumpers are orange, like what I did there with the colors, I hope. Makes it easy. And then you got the persuadables who are like both blue and orange. They're gonna go along with whatever they hear. So coming up, I'm gonna get to a slide and you're gonna hear the opposition's best message, right? This is a really conservative message, and you're going to get to see how the opposition likes it, how the persuadables react, and how we, the base, react. All right, and if you can't hear it, put your hand up. Let me know I've got something wrong. So I'm going to go to it. It's going to be next.
Our leaders must prioritize keeping us safe and ensuring that hardworking Minnesotans have the freedom to prosper. Taking a second look at people claiming to be refugees from terrorist countries or at people from places overrun with drugs and criminal gangs is just common sense. And so is curbing illegal immigration, so our communities are no longer flooded with people who refuse to follow our laws. We need to make sure we take care of our own people first, especially the people that politicians have ignored to cater to whatever special interest groups line their pockets, yell loudest, or riot in the street.
Okay. What did you notice about that?
Excuse me.
It seems like when there's negative language, then I would say the Republicans like it better, and the chart goes up, and we like it less.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of inflammatory language that was being used.
Yep. Negative, inflammatory, absolutely.
But
Go on, Sue.
the persuadables were
Oh,
reacting to it too. They were also kind of caught up in the negative comments and everything until it got too bad, and then they started to kind of fall away from it.
Yep, well spotted. Yep, and they only fell away from it a tiny bit. It still tracks, doesn't it? They're still at 70 if you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh my gosh, okay, so that a lot of people say, oh my gosh, we're in deep trouble if 50% of the population really likes a proto-fascist message, which is exactly what that is. I mean, that is downright scary where that's going to head next. And the persuadables are like, hey, it's bold, it's confidence. You know, they got a point. I like this. All right, okay. Blood pressure going to come down on the next slide because this is going to be the progressive message that tests the best with the persuadables. And you'll note that the persuadables like this up to about 70. Let's see how they like the best performing Minnesota progressive message. Here we go.
America's strength comes from our ability to be there for each other, to knit together people from different places and of different races into a community. For this to be a place of freedom for all, we cannot let a greedy few and the politicians they fund divide us based on what someone looks like, where they come from, or how much money they have. It's time we talk to each other and stand up for anyone getting bullied or shut out by ugly rhetoric. We must pick leaders who honor the golden rule, treating others as they want to be treated. Together, we can make America a place where freedom and community are for everyone, no exceptions.
Whew. Okay, what did you think about that one? What do you notice there?
Look at how high the opposition went.
I know, right? Even they liked it.
Ah,
Jeez.
I got to say something about that. That's a Minnesota aberration, which we should all be very proud of. It is. Like Ohio, for example, when they did this in Ohio, the opposition didn't really like it that much. They were below 50. Wisconsin, whoa, they were below 50.
Mhm.
In Minnesota, even the Trumpers respond kind of positively to this message. So, yeah. So there's a lot of hope in Minnesota, and we're a blue state, so
Mhm.
it kind of tracks. Our Trumpers aren't that Trumpian. Okay, so that's positive, right? And now the message that you heard, in a little bit, we'll break that down into like things that you can replicate in your messaging, either on social media or letters to the editor and so forth. Okay. But before we do that, I want to go back to this. Okay, so get that out of the way. Where's our persuadables? There they are. Okay, we want to get to those persuadables. So how are we going to do that? Well, here's some key points. Drop the facts. And this comes from some research that is in another book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's from, I guess, a psychiatrist or brain specialist, or I'm not sure what he is, who argues that fast thinking is like daily kind of dynamics, and slow thinking is more, okay, you're in the classroom. It's what I need to shift students when they come out of the hallway from their phones and talking to their friends and just kind of reacting to things. I need them to sit and recalibrate into the slow thinking sort of realm of like facts and information and so forth. If you're going to use a lot of facts when you're arguing, you hope people are in the slow thinking realm. But in fact, most political behavior actually happens in the fast thinking realm. And so this is a kind of like a brain research based argument for why we want to drop the facts. Another reason you want to drop the facts is because as soon as you're moving into facts, you're arguing, right? You're either implicitly or explicitly arguing, and folks can sense that. And that puts their hackles up and makes them dig into, where they are. And you want to move people. And so the last thing you want is them to be digging in. So you don't want to be arguing. But also when you argue, what you fight, you feed. And that's a great line to remember. What you fight, you feed. And I'll give you an example of that. And it's got to do with frameworks. When Donald Trump in 2016 was trying out his anti-immigration positions, he referred to immigrants as illegals. And that kind of went crazy through the kind of trollosphere. And there was a lot of people who would talk about what they're illegals, therefore they're just wrong. And one of the progressive responses to that was this wonderful phrase that no human being is illegal. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's great. That is so good. That really just speaks to me. I'm going to say that a lot. In fact, I want that on a bumper sticker. I want that on a lawn sign. I'm going to show the world that no human being is illegal, and that's going to completely undermine Trump. And I was wrong, and we were all wrong. I mean, it's kind of painful, but we were wrong. We were right, but we were wrong. We were right, but we were losing the messaging because we were repeating the opposition's argument. And those persuadables, they weren't hearing this wonderful philosophical recalibration of illegal versus legal and human beings. And they were hearing illegal. There's some argument about immigrants and they're either legal or illegal. And that's what they carry into the voting booth with them, that there's something about immigrants and illegality I don't like. It makes me nervous. I don't have time to think about this, so I'm going to vote conservative just to be on the safe side. So I spent all that money on bumper stickers and lawn signs, and all I did was, no, don't blame me. I'm just trying. It's mostly a story to get across my point. Okay, but if I'm asking you to drop the facts, what do I want you to replace it with? Okay, this gets back to some of the LTE work. Personal story, right? And here's some of the reasons why. Puts people at ease, keeps their attention, establishes a human connection. You're working their brain in their fast thinking realm, which is the realm of most political behavior. Persuadables, almost all their political behavior is in the fast thinking realm. A personal story, man, they can't say you got your facts wrong, which is what they're going to say if you try any facts at all. If it's about you, it's about your values, it's about what you care about, what you know. Okay, some asshole's going to be mean and say, I'm going to dismiss you, but most people aren't like that. And most people won't dismiss your experience. Okay. I also want you to think about replacing facts with values. And George Green, who I've mentioned a couple of times, he's got a great line about this. He says, stop, drop, and roll. Okay. And I've stolen that from him. When you are about to launch into an argument, he wants you to stop. Just, okay, stop right now, drop the facts, and roll with a new framing. And that new framing is not, they're not illegal. No human being's illegal. That framing is, what do I really care about? Like, what are my values here? And in the immigrant place, you want to be thinking, okay, what's my personal story about immigrants? How do I get across that? How do I diffuse this idea that immigrants are illegal? Well, one of the stories you can do is you recenter yourself and you look for the values, is you can think, okay, I'm going to I'm kind of cheating here because this is actually my enough of my story. Like I love my wife. We all love our wives. Okay, there's a universal value. We all love our partners. We all love, our loved ones. My partner is an immigrant, and I love how she's brought her values. I love how she's raising our children to be good people and valuable Americans and contributions to society. And that's the kind of world I want to live in, where people are bringing that to their child rearing. Okay, that wasn't great. I'm sorry. But hopefully it was good enough for you to see that I'm telling a personal story. I'm making this about my partner, and I'm saying something positive about her. You could do this about your neighbor. Almost all of us have a neighbor probably from somewhere else at some point. And you could tell the story of them, right? Okay, so hopefully you can see that stop, drop, and roll, like exemplified there. Okay, and one of the big reasons why you want to stop, drop and roll with your stuff is because the conservatives have been paying really smart people a heck of a lot of money to figure out how to message, and they're out ahead of us in a lot of ways. And that means they start the arguments by throwing out illegals, for example. And if you fight that, you're feeding it, and you're also probably fighting on their terms, on their ground. And this insight comes from George Lakoff, who wrote, great book, Don't Think of an Elephant. And, the bit of genius is in the title, or the title is a bit of genius. If someone says, don't think of an elephant, what's the first thing that you do? Don't think of an immigrant as an illegal. Okay. You're immediately going to conjure up somebody who's in jail. Maybe they look a bit dirty. Maybe they have a black eye. Maybe they
say, I have no voice.
Okay.
See, he's talking, but at least I can read some of the stuff. Here, maybe you take this one.
Oh, Mary's having some trouble.
So I thought just get some of the points.
Okay. Another example. I show this because I want you to think it isn't just progressives who get it wrong when we argue. Richard Nixon made a huge mistake when he said, I am not a crook, because he left us all with the image in our heads of a crook. He thought he was so smart. He was vice president for 8 years. He won an election, and now, he was all this anti-communism, and he said, I'm not a crook. And now we're all that. What he should have said was, I've always believed in the rule. I've always believed in the rule of law. All right, trying that for the older generation there. I don't remember tricking it too well, but my dad sure does. Okay. He should have said, I've always believed in the rule of law, but he didn't. Right? So it isn't just us who make these mistakes. Okay. Conservative framing. This is where we have to be careful, because they've worked out their arguments already. And you can pop something in the chat there too if you think a conservative frame. The ones that I've got are freedom from government. Right? Regulations are bad. Trump will save us. There's a real authoritarian strain to a lot of conservative framing. The conservatives love to frame around divisiveness. They love to frame in particular around scarcity. Do any of you have any examples of conservative framing that you can put in the chat? Taxes are bad. Nice one. Yep. Ooh, very Stauber. Our way of life. I've been thinking a lot about that one today. Fear. Yep. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety built in the way that the Republicans message. Exactly. Okay. Let's change those conservative frames. Let's recognize them. Liberals are wishy-washy, lovey-dovey, snowflakes. Love it. Okay. So before I move on to the next slide, I want us all to okay, we're going to recognize conservative frames, and we're not going to argue with them. We're going to stop, drop, and roll to progressive frames. What are some progressive frames? What are some frames that really support liberal left agenda?
Education. We don't want pollution.
I think the idea that our government is a vehicle for all of us to take care of each other.
Okay. The opposite of this kind of drive to individualize us all, to atomize us all, and to pit us against each other.
Yep. We're all in this
framing.
together.
Sorry, Holly, go ahead.
We're all in this together.
Yep.
We are
Fantastic.
part of the community. Yeah.
Absolutely. These are the progressive frames that we want to import into the conversation to nullify and to work against those conservative frames. Fairness, inclusion, collective effort, collective solutions, government as a force for good. Yeah. Abundance, that's a really important one right now in particular. Not to let them have the austerity arguments back, not to let them have the scarcity arguments back. They threw that out the window with those tax cuts, but they're shameless. So they're going to try it again. And we got to be ready this time that and we have an easy one. We're the richest country in the world. Of course we can afford it. We can also print the damn money, but that sounds a little bit, we're not quite there yet with ordinary people, but yeah, we can just print the damn money. Interest rates, actually, a growing economy will allow us to melt the snowball of debt. Right. No, just go with we're the richest country in the world. Mutual aid and hope for the future. And then the one that there are conservative frames though that I don't want us to reject, and I think you would agree. The flag, for example, right? Patriotism, freedom, our country. There's nothing worse visually than to have a Trump rally, we know Trump's going to drive from the airport to that place to have a meeting with some small business folks in Burnsville. There's nothing worse than the Trump supporters lining one side of the road with flags, and then the Trump protesters on the other side of the road without the flags. Very bad optics, folks. So think about that in your messaging too. You want to have your flag. You don't want them to be the ones to control the meaning of our flag, for example, or freedom or patriotism or country. And, a really good example, I think, how to turn this around is like the mask and freedom and all that. Some of the good stuff I heard, well, what about my freedom to not get sick? What about my freedom to not be afraid that, my mother's going to die? What about, you can always kind of find an opposite for their versions of freedom. What about my freedom not to have my water polluted?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, don't give up on those. All right, let's see what's next. Okay. Now we're going to move back to that really positive messaging that the persuadables loved. Okay, now we're gonna break it apart a little bit, and this all comes from the race class narrative. I like that golden rule, Arthur. Yeah, religion works. Like, particularly, we have Isaiah in this state, which is really great. And I taught Latin American history, and liberation theology in the 60s and 50s, 60s, and 70s was really, really a powerful mover for emancipatory social movements throughout Latin America. And it came out of a particular school of thought within the Catholic Church. So if you are religious, look for ways of kind of reclaiming religion for the progressive liberal left agenda. Absolutely. Okay, now this slide here. It's a little hard maybe to remember what we heard that was so powerful for the persuadables and for us, but I can go through it and help us remember. The first is, remember that first, even with the LTs, I said, have a really good first sentence. Well, the race class narrative suggests that first sentence should be an aspirational shared value. Something like, everyone deserves to have their voice heard and their vote counted. We all deserve to live in a world where we're not afraid for our children's safety. The next is, somebody is violating that value. And that's going to be some politicians or some corporations or a specific, or Tom Emmer or Stauber or Fischbach or Trump. They're violating that value. They're not allowing our children to have clean water. But 9 times out of 10, the GOP, they're not saying we don't want your children to have clean water. They're saying something that is a dog whistle.
Don't want to pay for it.
It's divide, right? Exactly. The people in the city are going to make the people in greater Minnesota pay for this. Or that policy is for people of color in the cities. It's not for us and our way of life out here in the countryside or on the range. Right? There's a dog whistle in there 9 times out of 10. And when Stauber talks about our way of life, that's exactly what that is. It's a dog whistle, because it's a contract. We shouldn't give that to him. We should argue for what we want our way of life to be. But when he uses it, he's contrasting it to Black and brown people in the cities. He's contrasting it to the Dem party, who's corrupt and, is just doesn't care about us, who's taking away our jobs. So we want to expose the dog whistle by calling it out. And then we want to explain why Stauber's doing this or Emmer's doing this. And it's because the GOP wants to divide us so that they can win elections, so that they can continue to serve their corporate donors. They want to continue to serve big pharma. And then we want to wrap up our messaging with a shared value. And this is the race class narrative. So the example here is to return to a kind of a multiracial, inclusive democracy where we all, so the invitation to collective action, where we all want a president who's going to protect our water and allow our children to grow up healthy and safe. The next slide gives us a good kind of breakdown for what that might look like. And I'm wondering if I can have somebody, a different person, read each of the colors. And so the example of a strong message that persuadables would really, really respond positively to is on the left. And then the kind of the architecture of that narrative is on the right. And so does anybody want to take themselves off mute and read the purple paragraph? Holly, would you mind doing that?
Sure. No matter the color of our skin, our gender, or what we will do for a living, most of us work hard for our families. And the purple is opens with shared value, names race and class.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In this case, they also name gender.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's hard to argue with. Most of us work hard for our families. Okay. Who would like to read the blue paragraph?
I'll do that.
Go for it, Sue.
But today, certain politicians and their greedy lobbyists hurt everyone by handing kickbacks to the rich, defunding our schools, and threatening seniors with cuts to Medicare and Social Security. They try to divide us from each other at work and in our communities because they know we're stronger when we have each other's backs. And it names racial scapegoating as a weapon that economically harms all of us.
Yep. And now the body of that right there is a response to whatever triggered you in the first place. Okay, you were on Twitter, or you were on Facebook, or you were watching the news, or you were reading something, and you saw that the GOP are going in to cut again. They're using a scarcity narrative, and they're trying to defund education. So right now, for example, Tim Walz had a big press conference about 10 days ago about the importance of education and the inequities in education and how COVID has really hurt people differentially. And so he wants to bring more attention and more of the budget to education in order to rebalance those inequities. You're watching that, and Gazelka comes on and is like, well, we don't really have the money for this. Okay. Today, certain politicians like Paul Gazelka and their greedy lobbyists hurt everyone, right? trying to defund our schools, but you would back it up and say, okay, I just really want to support this education. So what's my shared value? Right. And then you drag it into the facts of the moment, which is Paul Gazelka is trying to defund our schools. And he's trying to divide us around this idea that there's a scarcity narrative and that some are going to benefit over others. And that's just not true. Okay, then we move on to the red text. Who would like to read that?
We need to join together in union to demand that people who work for a living can earn a good living.
Yep.
Emphasizes unity and collective action to solve a problem.
Really good. Okay, and this green one, who would like to read that?
Just like we won safer workplace and civil rights in our past. Invokes previous cross-racial solidarity, wins to combat cynicism.
Yep. That wasn't on the previous slide. That's kind of an add in here. So I'll pause a second and emphasize why we look for opportunities to do this. And that's because a lot of persuadables are cynical. And that's partly why they're not paying a lot of attention to politics, and why they could vote for both Obama and Trump. That's another, like, one of those mind blown sort of things about persuadables. Like, how? Well, because they're not Trump supporters and they're not the progressive base. They can. So when John called them independents, another way of thinking about it is there's the swing voters. They're Obama, Trump voters in a lot of cases. So why are they like that? Okay, one, because they're not paying a lot of attention, but two, because they're not sure there's a difference. They're not sure politics even matters, right? And we don't want them to be dismissive of collective action. We don't want them to be dismissive of government being able to solve our problems, right? We're government. We pay the taxes. We elect our leaders. It could be one of us up there doing that. It isn't, but there are proxies. There are electeds. They work for us. So we need to anchor them into that we can do things. But to get them that far, we have to just get them to appreciate that it is possible. And pulling a story from the past is really useful. And now here's how I know that Tim Walz follows the race class narrative. Okay. Do you remember when he did one of his first press conferences? They loved this in Missouri. They were blown away by this story, right? So Tim Walz, in early COVID, was going to give us some bad news about how we were going to have to shut things down. But he also wanted to pump us up and say, you know, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And so he drew on a historical moment of previous sort of solidarity to get through this. And you know what he mentioned? Anybody following?
I don't remember.
You said one Minnesota, but.
Okay, the one Minnesota is part of it. Is, yeah, that there's the larger framework there, but he mentioned the Battle of Gettysburg, right? In the middle of a press conference about COVID, he said, we're going to get through this just like we did at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, I'm not from here. What is he talking about? But it didn't matter. It didn't matter that I didn't know. You all knew what he was talking about. And he just pulled it right out, right? And you think, oh, it's because he's a history teacher. No, it's because he's been studying the race class narrative. So's Keith Ellison, so's Peggy Flanagan. The Dems are on it. And I bring that up because we know that we need to repeat this stuff. We know it needs to be bold and confident and repetitive. And when you go away, you're going to think, oh, it's just little old me and maybe my little letter to the editor team. It's not. When you start to use this messaging and you start to look for it, you will see it in other NGOs. They're all using it. All the communications folks who do the websites and write the emails for loads of NGOs, progressive NGOs, are using the race class narrative now too. Their social messaging, the social media messaging, politicians are using this. So keep that in mind that you know, we're stronger together and you're part of something larger. We're creating an echo chamber. Okay, the last thing. Who wants to read that?
Mary. Shall I read?
I
it?
will,
Okay, Mary,
by
Mary,
joining together, we have the power in numbers to make sure we get a fair return on our work. Can you hear?
Mhm.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Connects joining together to achieve desired outcomes.
Yep. There you have it. The anatomy of a very persuasive winning narrative for the persuadables. You're going to have these slides,
Ah,
so you can refer to them,
Yay. Good.
and you want to practice this because it's tough. And I really suggest that our indivisible groups create sort of teams and maybe have like a monthly meeting where you get together and you kind of strategize and plan. And then if you realize, hey, we might need to meet, bi-weekly, then you could do that as well. And, it can be a couple different indivisible groups can join together. So for, and help each other on this. I'm going to sum up, but you've already seen this site, this slide. I've changed the Missouri-ness to Minnesota-ness there at the bottom now. And I threw a lot at you there. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask, or anything that you really are excited about and find revelatory and want to share back to the group?
Well, I think for me, I write a lot of letters, and I have established a relationship with our weekly newspaper editor. But I think, and maybe Sue, you fall into this, they hear from me so much that they don't print it, and I understand, but then if we did a group, that would make more sense. And I'm happy, this is one thing I do like, and I'm happy to write letters, but maybe just not my name on it.
Mary Beth, I know Artist Nelson, I think you're on here too, sometimes will write a letter and then she'll share it with the group. And if you are comfortable doing that, then we can take it, modify it for our own words, and put it in a newspaper, our own newspaper. So
Right.
anytime you write something, if you're comfortable sharing, I think that would be really helpful for the rest of us.
Yeah, and I've had it published in Buffalo and St. Cloud, and no success with the strip, but
Well,
But
you're
I'll
out
do
there.
that.
You're out there.
Yeah, taking
But this
pictures.
was helpful.
Oh, good, Mary Beth. Yeah, taking pictures and sharing that in our Facebook groups, that's something I see a lot in indivisible groups.
Mhm.
Yeah, and celebrating, we got one in, this is great. And that encourages other people to help build our own echo chamber.
One time I wrote a letter to the editor, and I had somebody who took the time to find out my phone number and called me just to thank me.
Really?
I would have loved to have written this. It was about LGBTQ rights. And but she said, I don't dare put my name to something like that. So thank you. So I've started doing that myself. When I see somebody, this is for the local paper, and if I can find their phone number, I give them a call and just say thank you, and try not to be really creepy about it, but just say thank you.
Okay.
That's a very good idea. Thank you, Sue.
Mhm.
Other questions for Scott tonight, or comments?
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's a good review.
Good.
Yeah.
I have a question, Scott. How are we going to get a copy of your slides?
In the chat. Thank you, Arthur. In the chat,
Okay.
there's now a Google Doc for those slides, and they're yours. If you wanted to present to somebody else, just take it, adapt it, run with it.
No, I can't.
Can't open it, Mark?
Right.
Copy.
We're all friends here. Okay.
We're sorry you can't.
Can't
can-
open it.
I
Can
can
you
send it
to
to,
Sue and she'll send it to all of us?
you good with that,
Yeah.
Sue?
That sounds great. That'd be fine.
That'd
Thank you.
help.
Sue.
That'd be great.
There's also, you know, I'll do a follow-up, Sue. I'll send you a few links to resources and things. So it'll have the slide deck, and it'll have, in particular, it'll have links to the race class narrative material. And that, I'm not even sure they're called the race class narrative anymore. They've kind of like expanded out into like a big messaging juggernaut where they're putting out weekly briefings. And one that I just got today, I'm gonna share that with you. Give me a tick.
Want to ask him what that
Yeah.
means?
Hey, Scott,
Yeah.
you said ASO Communications website. What does ASO stand for?
It's the woman's initials, Annette Schenker Osorio. Yep.
Okay,
You could just Google ASO communication.
yeah.
Okay, here.
And
is- All right, now, hot off the presses, I'm going to pop this in the chat. And Mark, I hope you have better luck with this. This is a messaging toolkit. And this is how like we're doing things these days with Google Docs, right? Like, so this is a messaging toolkit and it's from that same core group of folks, Demos, Heather McGee, Annette Schenker Osorio, and then some others who you know have been there or thereabouts. And this is their weekly briefing, and it came in my email today, I think, and it's how to message the fact that the Senate didn't convict Trump. And when you look at it, you'll see it's devoid of facts. It's not about the numbers. It's about abstract concepts. It's about making the GOP look bad for letting Trump off the hook, not holding him accountable, not holding, you know, murderers accountable, or, you know, Trump for inciting the riot and so forth. There's a lot in that, and you'll see that it fits this, it fits the kind of the winning narrative. And so I'll include that as well, Sue, in you know, the information I send you, but you've all got it now and it's not going to go away. Well, when you close it, I suppose it'll have to be in your history.
I printed it.
Very good. I wrote, so that comes from a woman named Jiggy. And I wrote Jiggy today and said, Jiggy, how can other people sign up for this? She's not written me back, but I'm trying to figure that out. And wouldn't it be great if we could all get this in our email and, you know, not let it be one of those things that we don't open, but it actually, okay, this, I want to see how to think about what just happened. I want to be part of this progressive echo chamber to make sure that, you know, we're saying things in ways that my coworkers who might be persuadable, you know, might respond positively to.
Here?
Yeah.
It's a L. Okay. Small L.
Excuse me, I was muted. We kept you a little bit longer tonight than we thought, but the information was good and I didn't see anybody leaving, so I think it was all okay.
Okay.
Scott, we may have to have you back for round 2, but like you said, next month we have George Green, and I know Roger and I and Bruce have been to some of his workshops and they are excellent. They're just excellent with the framing. So if those of you here tonight want to join us, that sounds good. We'll put it out to other people. So yeah, unless there's any other comments, thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate your time and all your efforts and your humor. And thank the rest of you for being here. And we don't have to go out into the cold in our cold cars and drive home.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you,
Good
everybody.
job.
It's been a real
Good
pleasure.
much.
Scott as
Thanks
well.
so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Thank
Sue,
you.
for
Bye.
sending us the
Thanks a
stuff.
lot.
Thank
Stay
you.
warm.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.